Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of Catholic Answers Live. We got a really good Friday show for you. Second hour, Jimmy Akin's going to be here, and we're going to let you ask him anything you want as a bonus. As a kind of a close the work week bonus, you get to ask Jimmy any question you want in the second hour. First hour, I'm kind of excited about. I've been looking forward to this opportunity to talk with Pat Flynn, who's really doing a great job as one of this new kind of class and they're high class people, a new kind of a group of young apologists who are coming up very charitable in their approach to the faith, very knowledgeable, and they give you hope for the future that there's going to be some folks when the Jimmys and the Tims of this world finally hang up their apologetic spurs, that there'll be some people out there on the World Wide Web explaining and defending the Catholic faith in a way that is that comports with all of the charity that is part of that faith. We're going to talk about God. Does God exist this hour with Pat Flynn? We'd love it if you are if you come down in the no category, if you want to call. You are welcome to call 888-318-7884. If you just like help explaining the existence of God, you're welcome to call as well, 888-318-7884. But it's up to you. We want to have lively conversations about the existence of God with Pat Flynn, and we need your help to do it. We need you to dial that phone. Atheists welcome, agnostics welcome, people who are nuns welcome, Christians welcome, Catholic Christians welcome, Orthodox Christians. I'm going to stop the list now. It just everybody's welcome. 888-318-7884. Pat Flynn has a podcast called The Pat Flynn Show, which is named after him. He's got a background in philosophy. He does a bunch of fitness education. He's written a bunch of books for dummies, which is exactly at my level. Pat Flynn, thanks so much for being with us.
Cy, it is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
This is why I was looking forward to this. Two things. It's I love when we do basic apologetics. I always feel like that is, I don't know, it's so valuable. And, it's nice when people have very specific technical questions about this or that council or whatnot. But basic things are really needed right now, like answers to, does God exist? But the other reason I was excited about getting to this hour is so many people are saying nice things about you and the work you're doing as an apologist.
Well, that is very nice to hear. Somewhat surprising.
Really?
I try to be nice. I try to do good work, but it's always flattering. Thank you.
So how are you going to come down on the question of does God exist?
Yeah, I think I'm going to confidently affirm. And this wasn't always the case. I have a background as a skeptic. For a long time, I would have said maybe not. Then for a while, I would have said almost certainly not. And then I gradually started to come back around again to maybe yes, and now I'm confidently in the yes camp.
I'm curious about something when you make that journey all the way out to definitely not. Mm-hmm. What's the thing that not the thing that finally closes the argument for you, but did you see? But the thing that makes that first turn back, what happens there?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the person side. For me, it was kind of investigating things philosophically from a secular and sort of materialist viewpoint. My introduction to philosophy was through the old atheists. In fact, it was actually through people like Mark Twain and H.L. Mencken, who were very funny writers who always had nothing nice to say about religion. But they passed me off to thinkers like Nietzsche. And then, that really colored my worldview for many years. And it really sparked my interest in the deeper philosophical questions about ultimate reality. So for me, what happened, interestingly enough, was the deeper I went into that worldview, the more incoherent it became. The less it seemed to actually explain, to a point where I got more questions that I had answers, or the answers that I would have gotten, I was unwilling to accept.
Yeah. And
I would say unwilling both intellectually and emotionally or morally. And we can unpack some of that. But it was actually by first going kind of deeper into serious, I think really serious atheistic philosophy that eventually caused me to want to take another look, to turn back around.
It's interesting because you try it on, kind of. And it's the trying it on that actually if you try it on in an authentic way, that is wanting not just to be a rebel, but wanting to get at the truth about reality, it doesn't actually fit. Atheism doesn't actually fit with a well-reasoned worldview.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there was a little bit of rebelliousness to my wanting to seek that out with other influences in my life. But it wasn't, I never had a hatred of religion or a hatred of God or a deep animus. And I think that that was helpful because once I got to that trying it on, I didn't feel like I had to keep it on. So once I think I saw some of these perspectives on questions of ultimate reality, on why anything exists instead of nothing, on consciousness was a big one for me. And I just found the answers in an atheistic worldview to just be quite inadequate. I was willing to have another look at theism. I was open to it, and I think that emotional and psychological aspect cannot be overlooked. And it's something I've come to appreciate since having many conversations with people of trying to feel it out. Okay, is it really an intellectual issue, or is there an emotional issue? And oftentimes it's a mix. To be honest, it's hard to peel the layers away sometimes. Mm-hmm.
Pat Flynn is our guest. He's the proprietor of a popular apologetics podcast, The Pat Flynn Show, where he doesn't just do apologetics. He does what is eclectic an offensive word, or would you be willing to identify with the word eclectic? Eclectic.
I will gladly accept it. I advertise myself as a generalist. I'm interested in many things. I try to be good at least most of them, or at least fairly competent. So I cover philosophy, theology, fitness, business, music, martial arts, a lot of different stuff. Definitely eclectic.
Our number here, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. If you are an atheist and you're like, well, I just don't find theism convincing, and you're listening to two people saying that we're not atheists because we don't find atheism convincing, you're welcome to call. We're happy to have a cordial conversation with you about the content, or we can just yell at each other back and forth if you'd like that. 888-318-7884. We're open to whatever your preference is, whether you're a theist or not. The topic on the question or on the table today is, does God exist? It's hard to think of a more basic, fundamental question, but sometimes, Pat, the most fundamental questions are the hardest to answer. For some reason, the more basic a question is, something so basic as, does God exist, it gets really hard to come up with a coherent and convincing answer.
Yeah, I can, because you're faced with all kinds of puzzles at many different stops along the way. So just to give an example, one initial puzzle is just the fact that there are things that are caused to exist. But if we think about that long enough, we get to this paradox where not everything can be caused, right? Because we'll get to the totality of reality, whatever that is, the collection of everything real. And there's no way that anything could have caused that, because beyond that, there's just nothing. So we have this, a very basic question, or a very basic something that we want to investigate. And we start with something simple. There are things that have causes. There are caused realities. And if we think about it long enough, we get to this interesting paradox where not everything can have a cause. And then there's the puzzle, right? And then you have to start to think through the implications of that. Well, what does that mean? How do we solve this puzzle? And this was one of the puzzles that first very much intrigued me and started to point me back towards theism. But you're right, they're not easy puzzles. Even once you have God, kind of on, once you affirm theism, there's still many puzzles. There's coherence of theism questions, especially as you get deeper into the nature of God, things surrounding divine simplicity, things entailing, like logical entailment with causation. So it gets very complex so I don't want to make it seem like this is easy stuff by any means. And if nothing else, I can sympathize, and I think I can relate to people who've struggled with this, because I've certainly struggled with it myself.
888-318-7884, our number. Does God exist? A very basic question today. You're welcome to call ask anything in that regard. If you'd like some help explaining it, maybe you don't believe it. Pat Flynn is here to give you an answer. Whether you accept it or not, that's up to you. 888-318-7884. I always feel like the thing that convinced me that God exists is, the greatest mathematician and logician of the 20th century, Kurt Gödel, made a logical proof that God exists. And I've read through that, and I'm just kidding. I can't understand any of that stuff.
That's one of the toughest ones, right?
Yeah.
Don't push me too far on that one, right? I could give you the sketches, but that's about it, right?
All right. Well, we'll take a break then, and I'll try to get my brain around Kurt Gödel. How do you pronounce it?
The incompleteness theorem.
The incompleteness theorem. I don't know, but he's the greatest logician of the 20th century, and he said God exists. So I'm going to just go with that. I'm just going to put that on my bulletin board, and we'll be right back with the second greatest logician, Pat Flynn, right after this.
We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Hey Alexa, how many ways can I get EWTN?
You can get EWTN on television, via cable and satellite, on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Google Play. You can get EWTN radio in your car on Sirius XM Channel 130 and on the go on any mobile device with the EWTN app. And here's the best news. Now you can get EWTN's great programming on Me.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. We're asking a basic, but for many people in the modern world particularly, but in ways that probably was never the case before the modern world, many people struggle with finding an answer to the question, does God exist? Your calls, your comments, your questions are welcome at 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Our guest is Pat Flynn, who's someone we've been wanting to have on the show because we just hear so many good things about him, and when you hear him doing apologetics, as I said, the things we look for here are an ability to explain and defend the faith and a heart that's full of charity to those who might ask questions or even confront you, and Pat has both of those, so we're delighted to have you on, Pat. Thanks for doing this with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So we're still screening calls, so we'll head to the phones in a second. But the part of the struggle in the modern world, as you said, is there's a kind of you feel like you have to get over the emotional hurdles to accepting the existence of God almost before you can get to the intellectual hurdles. I just wonder how you do that. How do you?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think a lot of it comes down to the problem of pain, to the problem of evil. So having some decent responses to the problem of suffering, pain, evil, whatever you want to call it, can definitely help. And like I said, sometimes the intellectual and emotional are so tightly, interwound that giving good, philosophical answers can help to, I think, cool the emotions somewhat, and vice versa. Sometimes just being a friend to somebody can make them, open to hearing some philosophical responses as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I suppose we have to not hide the fact that we're believers, because that's always a temptation, especially in certain social or professional situations. A willingness to say, when the derision starts or something like that, to say, well, I believe in God, and then let the chips fall where they may. It's actually kind of a brave act in many places. Like if you work for Google, I bet that's really brave in some rooms.
Right. And I think it helps just to be able to list some quick reasons like, hey, I believe in God because I think God is the best explanation of a wide range of human experience. I think God is the best answer for why anything exists instead of nothing, for why the universe began to exist, for why the universe is fine-tuned for the emergence of intelligent life, for the uncanny applicability of mathematics, for a perception of an objective moral realm, for the irreducibility of consciousness, for near-death experiences, mystical experiences, religious experiences. And, as a Christian, I think God is the best explanation for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And just being able to list reasons like that, even without getting into the technical tall grass of argumentation, often is a great way to just impress people.
That list is awesome. I wish I could do that. I'm going to go back and try to memorize. That was that very impressive. Yeah, because then now the conversation is open. Then it's not just oh, we're all kind of showing by our smirk that we're members of the club. But just to say, I'm not a member of the club, here's a list of reasons why. You don't have to be quite as proficient as you just were there, but to be able to, I mean, I don't think that there can be something that came from nothing. Throw that out there and let them give you Lawrence Krauss as a response, and then you go back and forth about the different meanings of the word nothing. But you can at least have the conversation. People have to know that there are believers around them.
Right. And just when people see that you have reasons, whether or not they think they're good reasons is another question, and that's a worthy conversation to have. But just seeing the presentation of reasons is a great conversation starter.
Yeah.
And I found that sometimes that's just enough. They'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that.
Yes.
I'm like, I haven't even gotten to the arguments yet.
Yeah. All right, let's go to calls. Edward in New Hampshire is up first. Edward, your question for Pat Flynn.
Hello.
Hi, Edward. You're on the air with Pat Flynn.
Okay, sir. Yeah. So, I've never been on the radio before, so I might be a little bit nervous. But I'm not an atheist, but I went through an evolution. Like, I didn't really care if there was a God or not. So I decided to research things on my own, and just coming up with, one of the evolutionists, like, two tiny amoeba. Like, how did two tiny amoeba evolve at the same time? The birds, their symbiotic relationship with flowers. How does that evolve at the same time? Even things like, I'm fascinated with, we had the eclipse a few years ago. Remember, so I started researching eclipse. The moon is 400 times in diameter smaller than the sun, but it's 400 times closer. So they cancel. Like, how do things like that happen by themselves? And
Edward, I want you to have a conversation here with Pat, but I want Pat to respond to that, because that is actually, to me, I find what Edward said convincing. Maybe I'm easily convinced, but I find it quite compelling.
Well, there's an intuition there, right? And we're very good at detecting what things that at least seem to be designed, that have the appearance of design. Now, evolution is, of course, a hot debate, because if you're an atheist, you might use evolution to really just say that, well, it's just an appearance of design, but things aren't really designed. And then you can get into the debate, about irreducible complexity or intelligent design or something like that. I find it's often useful just to sidestep that debate entirely and look just right at physics, which I think, I'm sorry, was it Edward? I think Edward was mentioning, is that right at the kind of fundamental level, right at the beginning of the Big Bang, we have this incredible, exquisite fine tuning of these constants and quantities that if they were off by just a hair's breadth, forget about intelligent life. In some cases, we wouldn't even have chemistry, or the universe would just collapse back in on itself. And I think you can make a very plausible case, at the very least, to say that this is at least evidence in the scale of theism. This at least points towards the direction of a designer with a super intellect, right? Beyond a super intellect, right? That also has to transcend physical reality, right? If you're going to design physics, you can't be within physical reality. So I think that intuition is a good one. I don't think that we need to abandon that intuition. I actually think it can be defended. And then it's just a question of, well, where do you want to have that? Where do you want to have that fight? Do you want to go into the evolution debate? And that's certainly interesting. And I think there are cases to be made there by people like Dr. Michael Behe. I sometimes think he doesn't get the hearing he deserves. But I think where the debate on teleology and design is really hot right now, especially in the literature, is on this question of fine tuning. But then you have even more kind of bedrock metaphysical arguments for teleology as well. So all this is to say is I think your intuition is right. I think we all have this intuition, and I think you actually have to be indoctrinated out of it. I think it's something that takes a lot of time to sort of get yourself in a position where you can look out in the world and you can notice you can look at these things and somehow think that there isn't intentionality behind them. That's a difficult thing to do, but it has been accomplished. People can get to that position.
Edward, what do you think of all that?
Okay, that's great. So one thing that, without even getting into the Big Bang and how many times that we would have had to have won the lottery ticket, right? So there's only two ways for us to be here. And one is if there was thought first, and another is if matter willed itself into existence with all these lottery tickets. So I find them both, I mean, you know, when researching it, they're both impossible or nearly impossible because we're here. But if thought happened first, everything else is explainable. If matter willed itself into existence, then we won the lottery millions of times. Never mind what you were talking about like if gravity was a little bit too strong. Like so everything was created with nearly the same amount of matter and antimatter. Just matter was, they call it a tiny fraction more, and we can see 13 billion years into the past.
I like the way you just end in speechlessness there, Edward, because it does leave you speechless, Pat.
Right. Yeah. And I would say, think in terms of like degree of expectation, right? So if you're a committed physicalist, right, and you think that whatever else reality is, at bottom, it's just going to be a collection of sort of disparate, unintentional, unconscious, unaware physical symbols, you know, whatever those are. Some atheists might commit to a specific type. Maybe it's a fundamental particle like a fermion or a boson. Others might just say the type doesn't matter so much, but it's going to be something like that. It's going to be just a kind of physical symbol that's stripped of any qualitative dimension. Would you ever expect or predict things like consciousness or moral communities or anything that we experience on that type of worldview? Maybe. I think as I've thought more deeply about this, I've come to the stronger claim to think that it's probably impossible to get the type of world that we see from that hypothesis. But at least I think we can defend it. It seems very much improbable. But if you're a theist and you have a supreme being at the foundation, God, which is pure actuality, and as you hinted at, right, that God is not just omnipotent but omniscient, right? He has this super intellectual ability. Might we then expect moral communities? Might we then expect rational beings? Can we better explain these things on that hypothesis? And I think the answer is yeah. It just seems a lot more probable. And we don't even have to, you know, be all that aggressive with our argumentation. It just seems like this worldview better predicts and explains things like consciousness, rationality, physical fine-tuning. I would even argue evolution itself, right? I think evolution is better explained by theism than atheism, than a purely reductionist, physicalist worldview. I think that's maybe a helpful way to think about it. And I think it's an easier and more modest way to think about it as well.
Thanks, Edward. It was nice talking with you. We're open to all atheists and agnostics, non-believers and nuns. Today we're talking about, does God exist? And, you know, you got a host and a guest who both say, yes, God exists. So the conversation gets interesting to the degree that we have variety. So if you want to call and explain to us why God does not exist, we'd love to have that conversation with you. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. We go now to Randall in Melbourne, Florida. Randall in Florida, your question for Pat Flynn.
Hello. Okay, so this is how I sort of rationalize at least part of it. If you, a recent discovery a couple of years ago, they found what they believe are the earliest drawings ever made by man. Okay, so this is like 70,000 years ago. So this person had the capability of thinking for themselves, wanting to express themselves, and they put these lines on a stone, and there it is there for us to see to this day. And ever since then, man has had the capability of expressing themselves. I mean, we have it in our music, we have it in our art, and all the rest of it. Okay, and this is a huge difference between us and everything else that is created, everything else that has happened to be. I think the main problem, so there's never been any doubt in all of history that there's something else out there that is far, far greater than we are. But I think that what has happened in the last, 50, 100 years, is that we start to assume that we're the most important thing.
I want to get Pat a quick response to that, because I think there's something fundamentally right about that. There is a problem in the late modern world that has not existed before.
And that's this problem of putting ourselves too high or too low.
I'm going to leave that in your hands. What do you think?
Well, I could see it either way, in the sense that Randall pointed out that there does seem to be something fundamentally unique and special about human beings that we don't see in the lower animals. So I want to acknowledge that, where some people want to put us down there. But the flip side is, for those who deny God, also kind of replaces God with ourselves. So I could see it going.
Let's address both of those when we come back, okay, Pat? We got to take a quick break.
Sounds good to me.
Pat Flynn is our guest. Does God exist is our question. Where else are you going to get this question on radio? Where? On TV. Only here. Right back with more Catholic Answers.
Catholic Answers Live.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
2 wonderful episodes of Catholic Answers Focus this week. Get them wherever you get your podcasts, or listen at CatholicAnswersFocus.com. On Monday's episode, Father Sebastian Walsh, the author of Secrets from Heaven, joins us to consider today's struggles in the light of the gospel stories of Jesus asleep in the storm. There's more to that story than you might think. And then on Wednesday, we asked Trent Horn to tackle a very difficult question, the question of nothing. Is there really such a thing as nothing? Did God really make the universe out of nothing? Prepare to let your mind bend. Catholic Answers Focus is free and brand new twice a week, and now also available on YouTube. Visit us at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or subscribe to Focus on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Does the church have too many rules? Join me, Dr. David Anders, as we answer your questions right here on Called to Communion, Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and Pat Flynn is a host. He's the host of the Pat Flynn Show, which airs on the internets. So just look at the internets for the Pat Flynn Show, and you can find it. Among the things that Pat Flynn does, and he does a whole bunch of different things, as he says of himself, he is a generalist, and he's even written a book about why you should be a generalist, which is called "How to Be Better at Almost Everything."
That's correct.
I got it right. Mm-hmm. Okay, how to be better at almost everything. So, the question we have put to Pat Flynn today is, does God exist? It's one we're happy to get a chance to address, especially on a Friday when everybody needs a little bit of a brain teaser. We need a little brain workout on a Friday. And your questions are welcome at 888-318-7884. If you disagree with me and Pat, I'm just putting myself in his company to make myself look good. If you disagree with us that God exists, then you are especially welcome. 888-318-7884. Our caller, Randall from Florida, the basic point Randall's making, for the entire history of the human race, people acknowledge the divine. It's only in the late modern period that becomes incredibly difficult. The question is that because people exalt humanity too much, or because we treat humanity with too little dignity?
Yeah, I think it is important to recognize that atheism is something of an extreme anomaly. It's really an aberration. I mean, even throughout, and sometimes people want to say, well, it's because we have science now, but we have to remember some of the greatest scientists, both then and now, were and are theists. And of course, I would argue that the best of scientific evidence and knowledge points toward God. So we really just seem to be living in a strange time. And I think there's just many other influences that are pressing in upon us, influences that often hijack science or will use science for their purposes to promote atheism or secularism. But atheism has always been a minority position. It still is a minority position. It does seem to be increasing in contemporary times, but it's still a minority position. And I think it's just important to recognize that it's part of our soul's upward yearning, right? We are made for God. It takes a lot of work to really become an atheist. I would know because I put in that work previously.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, just to your point, or to I believe it was Randall's point, is there is something special about humanity. I think that there's a difference in kind, not just degree, between us and the lower animals, and this is, of course, demonstrated through reason, language. We have just certain powers, intellectual, I would argue, immaterial powers that the lower animals don't have. At the same time, we are not God. We are not even lowercase g gods. So this is where the virtue of humility comes in, right? Humility is really just kind of knowing your place in the proper arrangement of things, not thinking too highly of yourself, but also not self-depreciation, not thinking too lowly of yourself either.
888-3187-884. Oh, it's such a weird situation to be exalted as if we are ourselves gods. And thank you, Beyonce, for making us all feel that way. But also to this idea that we're nothing. We're just dust, and we're hardly more than the animals. It's a very odd split mind we have in the modern world.
Right, and one seems to lead to the other, which I find very peculiar.
Yeah. Let's go to Ian in Lawrence, Kansas, listening on 1090 AM. Just in case you want to dial, Ian just dialed the number 888-318-7884. Ian in Lawrence, Kansas, your question for Pat Flynn.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
Hi.
See, I guess my question. Oh, shit. Excuse me.
You're listening to Catholic Answers. Our guest is Pat Flynn. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Caller, do we still have you there with us?
Yeah. My question goes back to the moon issue that you guys were talking about. And in all of our, I guess, how am I going to phrase this? In all of our researches and readings and such, are we not at a point where both, I guess, theology and science go away, and they sort of transform into some higher understanding?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I would want some more content there, but for me, science is it's a philosophical question, actually, what science is. So that's why you shouldn't be into scientism, right? To think that you can only know things through science, because to know what science is of course something you're going to need philosophy for. But science to me is a wonderful enterprise. It's looking mostly at an etiological domain of how one physical process leads to another physical process. I think there's a lot more there to still be discovered. So I don't think we're quite done away with science in any full respect yet. Theology seems to me to be as alive as ever. Certainly, there's great theological debates still in the Catholic world and in other theological traditions as well. So I don't see an end to either of these disciplines anytime soon. But maybe you have a specific reason for thinking so that maybe I haven't considered yet.
Do you, Ian?
Well, I do, actually. So I guess I wouldn't call me an Aristotelian, where I will look only at the facts, only at observable, demonstrable occurrence, and then try to figure out some sort of hypothesis using all of the other points of data that I have in order to come up with a decent view of how this world operates and what is actually in this world and this life, reality, etc. And it occurs to me to then go back to the origins of this whole theology and et cetera. You know, the most ancient of our human theologies or mythology, you know, going back to the moon that you guys were talking about, seems to be quite clear and unargumentative about how the moon and our whole solar system. I'm thinking about the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian creation epic, which says that the god Marduk, after destroying Tiamat, remade the entire solar system, including Earth and Jupiter and everything else.
But there's, I just want to get something clear though. So you want us to go back to a time where there was this kind of generalized sense of mystery, and stop with specific theologies, or what is it that you're suggesting here, Ian?
I'm actually adopted a view of what if those early Sumerians, in their own words, were telling us, because even Sumerians will say that humans were created by gods.
Oh, okay. So, this is like the Ancient Aliens hypothesis. You see this on the my favorite channel, the History Channel, which should be called the Aliens Channel, I know. But we loved a conversation about aliens here. We actually take that quite seriously, Ian. So the point being then, what if these ancient stories are in fact telling us a truth about ourselves, which is we're not created out of the dust of the earth by God directly, but that we are the product of aliens having visited the earth and created us?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I've heard people actually invoke aliens to try and explain the resurrection as well. So I would say a few things about this. One is if you're trying to get around some of the traditional arguments for God by bringing in aliens, I think you're always going to be limited in what you could explain. So say you're trying to explain the beginning of evolution or something like that, and people have seriously entertained the idea that maybe, you know, the beginnings of life to solve the origins problem were kind of seeded here, right, by some other life form. But aliens aren't going to be able to explain the beginning of the universe, right, or the fine-tuning of physics, for example. They're going to be contingent upon all of that stuff. Same thing when we have the deeper metaphysical arguments for God, we're going to arrive through sort of deductive certainty at a supreme being. So I'm certainly not against the idea of there being extraterrestrial life. I'm completely open to it. I just haven't seen evidence that has convinced me that it's out there yet. And certainly no evidence that would convince me that it provides a better explanation for anything that's relevant or related to either God's existence or the Catholic faith.
So, but let me just be clear about something that you said there for Ian and for anybody else listening. You're saying the proof of the existence of God is solid in itself. So even if it turned out that human beings were the product of some alien technology, this would not at all upset the proof for the existence of God.
Yeah, I would think it's a little strange, right?
Yeah.
But hey, look, God uses instruments. He uses secondary causes all the time. There's nothing to say that God could not have, in his providential order, decided that we were going to be started off here on Earth by aliens. That would in no way affect my belief in God. It would cause me to reconsider some other things. But yeah, I think theism would still be perfectly secure.
Ian, thanks. I got to go to a break, but thank you very much for that question. More folks on the line. Don't worry, we're going to get to you. Those who are on the line will be right back after this. I have to read this copy, however, that Carrie wrote, and I want everyone here. Is this good copy? What would you say if I told you all of our 20 Answers books were on sale for $1 each right now? Yeah, mind blown, right? Seriously, that's the copy that Carrie wrote me to read. Carrie, come on, it's Friday, man. Visit shop.catholic.com where all of our 20 Answers books and ebooks are $1 each. Yeah, mind blown, right? That's a savings of 75% on dozens of great titles. Act now. The sale lasts for 1 week, and then it's gone in a flash. Every single one of the 20 Answers books, whether you get the ebook version or the paper version, it's $1 right now at shop.catholic.com. Yeah, mind blown, right?
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
A lot of people think that street evangelization involves yelling out of a bullhorn telling people that they're going to hell. Not so with St. Paul's Street Evangelization. Our methods are non-confrontational and effective. We simply offer information on the Catholic faith along with rosaries, miraculous medals, and prayer. Pope Francis wrote about how beautiful it is to see street preachers joyfully bringing Jesus to every corner of the earth. Street evangelization is fun and fruitful. Join us today at streetevangelization.com.
He was a doctor of the Church and one of the most famous saints of all time.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Augustine is honored for his immense contributions to theology, but he balanced his genius with humility. He once declared, "It was pride that changed angels into devils. It is humility that makes men as angels." He died in 461.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Yeah, mind blown, right? J.D. Flynn is here with us. Excuse me, not J.D. Flynn. That's so funny. J.D. Flynn is our friend. He's the you know J.D. Flynn? You might be related to him.
I do not.
Are all you Flynns related? I don't know why.
He may be a distant cousin of sorts.
No,
yeah.
He runs the Catholic News Agency. He's really good. He's a great journalist. You should be proud that I accidentally called you that. But this is Pat Flynn. Pat Flynn here of the Pat Flynn Show. The question on the table, does God exist? Your questions welcome for Pat Flynn, 888-318-7884. I've kept some folks waiting, so I want to get back to that. Tom in Des Moines, Iowa, listening on Iowa Catholic Radio. Your question, Tom, for Pat Flynn. It's going to be one of these. Oh, hi, Tom.
So I am a believer, but I was hoping that Pat could maybe discuss the secular response to fine-tuning of the multiverse.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the multiverse is a response that's sometimes brought in to explain the fine-tuning that we talked about before. And it tries to often do so by invoking the idea of trillions of different universes, bubble universes, perhaps even an infinite number of bubble universes. So that way, by chance, we have just landed in, just the one that we are with just the dial set in the perfect way. So they're trying to avoid, to be clear, they're trying to avoid the design inference and opt for a chance inference. And I think we can give at least just three general responses of why we don't need to be concerned about this objection. One is that it certainly violates parsimony. God is just a much simpler explanation. And since we don't have any direct observable evidence of a multiverse, and we have other good arguments for God, it just seems like let's just saw that off. It doesn't seem to add any explanatory power to our worldview. We just don't need it. So let's go with the simpler explanation, God. Number two is the multiverse would be susceptible to the arguments of requiring a beginning, including the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin proof. So we still probably wouldn't have enough time, right? So even if there were a multiverse, it would still require a cause, I would argue, and we would still need a transcendent cause of the multiverse. And so we're not going to necessarily get out of a theistic implication there. But third and finally, I think this is the most important, and this is pretty well recognized, I think, in the literature at this point, is that the multiverse itself would require fine-tuning. Any model of the multiverse that is plausible right now itself requires quite an extreme amount of fine-tuning. So rather than solve the problem, you really just you just relocate it.
Tom, what do you make of that?
What would you say the strongest argument against fine-tuning is then?
I think the multiverse is probably it. If I'm being honest, and I think that's why a lot of people gravitate toward that, because that seems to be the best way to try and escape or dodge a theistic inference. So if you're asking me if I were trying to dig my heels in a skeptical position, if I were a naturalist, where would I go? I think I would just try and push the multiverse hypothesis as far as I possibly could. I don't think I would want to try and say that the fine-tuning is necessary. I don't think that many people are willing to or want to try and affirm that. So you really try and have to figure out some scenario where you can attribute the precision to a matter of chance. I don't think it ultimately works, but if I were to try and double down, I think that's where I would go.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that call. 888-318-7884. We're asking Pat Flynn, does God exist today? You can find Pat on the internet at the Pat Flynn Show. To me, the multiverse, it just seems like cheating. Like you get an entire, modern synthesis explanation of the universe, as good as it can be, and then you go, well, there's no way that could have happened unless there was a divine intelligence who designed it that way. So you go, yeah, but it's not the only universe. Like that, it just seems like cheating to me.
Yeah, it does. And it's one of those things that, again, I think we can be open to. I don't have, an in principle problem with the multiverse.
Okay.
If we live in a multiverse, fine, but let's get some other evidence or reasons on the table. And I don't want to say that there are no other reasons for thinking that we might live in a multiverse, but I don't think as an objection it's going to get around either the fine-tuning argument, and it's certainly not going to get theism off the table in a complete sense by any means.
If there is a multiverse, though, do you think that you, Pat Flynn, in another universe, you have a goatee?
Yeah, so that's one of the issues with the multiverse is like, how do we know we're not in a multiverse where, everything that appears to have been following a sort of rational line hasn't just spontaneously popped into existence 5 minutes ago, right? So we'll actually face, unless you restrain the multiverse hypothesis significantly, you can face some pretty radically skeptical and I think frightening scenarios. But once you start to put those restraints in place, you're going to be, again, inviting fine-tuning a designer. Yeah. Exactly, right. Mm-hmm.
Kyle on YouTube says, I believe in God, but how do I prove God to an unbeliever? What would you suggest to Kyle?
Well, I would have a list of reasons. I think that really helps. I think just trotting out that list and inviting them to say, hey, which one of these kind of speaks to you? Which one do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about contingency, causation, why anything exists rather than nothing? I like taking that path, right, to kind of argue that, well, look, there are things that have causes, right, but not everything can be caused, right? And that's that paradox we were talking about earlier. So there has to be at least like one uncaused thing, at least one. Otherwise, we're stuck in this scenario of affirming that nothing came to exist. And this will be true whether you think that there's a finite number of things in reality or an infinite number. It doesn't matter. You have to affirm at least one necessary or uncaused being. And then you can do the work of trying to unpack what that necessary or uncaused being is. And I would say it has to be a pure act of existence existing through itself. And, well, why would this be, right? Let's think about it for a minute. Well, if it wasn't a pure act of existence existing through itself, for one thing, if it weren't existing through itself, it would have to exist through something else, right? Which means it would have to be caused. Well, then it's a caused, uncaused being. That makes no sense, right? And if it weren't really present in reality, then it would be awaiting activation, which means it would also have to be caused. And then I added the word pure there. Why pure? Well, if there were anything about this reality that were different from an active existence existing through itself, it would be different from an active existence existing through itself, and it would just be a caused reality, right? So whatever this thing is, it's not going to be susceptible to any differentiating features. It has to be a pure active existence existing through itself, which means that it has to be unique. It has to be one and only one. Because if there could be no differentiating features, you can't have multiple instances because you need differentiating features for that. So we have this uncaused reality that is a pure active existing through itself. It's purely actual, right? It's utterly unique. And then I think you have kind of everything on the table there that you need to start unpacking the traditional divine attributes, right? If it's purely actual, then it's unchanging. If it's unchanging, it can't be restricted in time or space. It's got to be possessed of all perfections, powers. I'm giving a general sketch here, but that's one path that convinced me originally when I was skeptical. Yeah. These traditional contingency style arguments, borrowing insights from definitely from St. Thomas Aquinas, but contemporary thinkers as well. So I would check those arguments out. I found those very convincing when I was a skeptic.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate the question over there on YouTube. On the line now, John in Denver, listening on 1060 AM. John, your question for Pat Flynn.
Oh, I'm a practicing Catholic, and at the holidays, my son-in-law said that we came from the apes. Is there an impossibility that it's a different species? I think maybe I believe that a dog cannot impregnate a cat. It's different, or a horse cannot impregnate maybe a bear. But so, can we come from the apes?
Yeah, that's one of the definitions of a species is an inability to produce what's it called, a fertile offspring.
Right.
Means you're in two different species.
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things about this. I think first, just to help diffuse the tension, is I think, again, theism better explains evolution. So I think evolution actually better points to theism than atheism. So let's just get that on the table. Like, we don't need to be concerned about evolution being true as believers in God. I think when you think about it more deeply, it supports the God hypothesis. Secondly, just to be clear about evolution, it doesn't necessarily say we came from apes. It just means that the commitment is to a common ancestor, right? And there's sometimes confusion there, and we want to make sure that we have this right. So that way we're understanding what the view is before we start to make arguments about it. Now, if God, and this is something the Catholic Church affirms, if God wanted to create humans through an evolutionary process, that's totally God's prerogative. Who are we to argue with God? And I don't think that there needs to be any serious concern or worry there. All we have to affirm is that God creates every unique individual human soul. And I think we have good grounds, good arguments from consciousness to argue that has to be the case, that we're not going to get consciousness from purely physical processes alone. But if God wanted to lead up to that with an evolutionary process, there's certainly no conflict there. I just want to emphasize this isn't something that we need to this isn't a hill that we need to or should die on as Catholics. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't any issues with evolutionary science. But that is, again, that's something where as Catholics we can and should be completely open to the evidence wherever it goes.
So, in other words, one can fully accept, even you could say, I think evolution from natural selection is a reasonable theory. That's not the same as saying we came from apes. These are not necessarily the same argument.
Right, we came from God, maybe through an evolutionary process. That's what I would want to affirm. If the claim is that evolution is the end all be all explanation, well, that's a silly claim, because evolution itself depends on a finely tuned universe, right? So that's why I like focusing on design at the most fundamental level. And the even more fundamental level than that is the metaphysical level with teleology. We haven't even talked about that. So I think you can make an even more secure argument for design through metaphysics. But certainly if we're looking just at nature, the place to look is physics. And evolution has no chance at all unless we have a universe that is really exquisitely set up right at the beginning, with certain constants and quantities and laws that enable chemistry and that can allow for the emergence of intelligent, interactive life and moral communities and things like that. And again, I would just keep insisting that is best explained by theism.
John, what do you think of that?
That's good. Okay, here's another quick question. Do miracles prove the Catholic Church that science can't understand? John,
I'm going to let him just answer that because we don't have a lot of time. But do miracles prove the Catholic Church? And maybe another way to say that related to today is, can miracles prove the existence of God?
I think there's strong evidence, right? So for the resurrection, for example, we have to affirm that this miracle was a divine signature. This was God signing off, right, on the claims of Christ. So yeah, our faith really does come down to a miraculous event occurring in history. But I also want to say that one of the reasons I'm Catholic, one of the reasons I came fully into the church is because God has continued to offer confirmatory signs throughout history, which makes sense, right? If God were to establish a church, which as Catholics we believe he did, a visible, hierarchical, unified church, might he give us confirmatory signs throughout history to just reassure us that we're on the right track? And miracles such as Eucharistic miracles, apparitions, Fatima, I find those very convincing. I think that those are good evidence, not just for God's existence, but for Catholicism specifically.
And there's such this is something I've kind of come to appreciate from our apologists, but you're pointing to it. There are proofs for the existence of God, but there's also just good evidence. It doesn't have to be a proof. It's okay to be just convinced by good evidence.
Yeah, and I think that's why I try to, make the claims a little bit more modest. I think if we try to set the bar too high, people might be disappointed because we didn't meet their expectations. So we just say, well, look, I have these reasons, I have this evidence, I think God is the best explanation for it. It seems like the hypothesis that Catholicism is true makes a lot of sense of things like these Eucharistic miracles and Fatima. And then I think that'll just help people to see that you're reasonable, And that's what we're after.
Praise God. Thank you. Just in the booth, can I get a show of hands? Pat's first appearance on Catholic Answers Live. How many approve? Oh, universal acclaim for you. Universal acclaim. You did a great job. You are just as advertised, Pat Flynn. And I hope that people will visit you at the Pat Flynn Show on the internets and look up all of your books. We'll do it again sometime, Pat Flynn. Was it a horrible experience, or will you come back?
I absolutely loved it. Would be honored to do it again, Cy. Thank you.
All right. God bless you, brother. Have a great weekend.
God bless you.
We'll be right back. However, our work is not done here for the day. We got Jimmy Akin, and a special deal. You get to ask him anything you want. Anything you want to ask Jimmy Akin, you get to ask right after this. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. As promised, Jimmy Akin with us this hour. Jimmy, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of many, many things, including the most recently the book, The Bible is a Catholic Book, which if you call up and ask for it, we'll probably give it to you free today. It's such a good book. We want more and more people to have it, help you understand what the Bible is, where the Bible came from, who were the people that put the Bible together, and why did they put it together that way. By the way, the number, 888-318-7884. It's I'm gonna name this Free for All Friday. You get to ask anything you want. Free for All Friday. Ask Jimmy Akin anything you want. Are you ready for that, Jimmy?
Oh yeah, people can ask about anything. They could ask about Gödel's incompleteness theorem, or Gödel's ontological proof of God, or what happened during the Kyujo incident at the end of World War II, where the Japanese military tried to kidnap the emperor and talk him out of making peace with the United States.
That I don't. They do not have to ask about, because there is already an entire episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World available today on that very topic.
True, and it's been getting feedback. People have been saying, wow, fascinating. I never knew about this secret Japanese conspiracy that nobody ever talks about hardly.
Was it mostly kind of junior officers who decided that they're going to just take this thing over because...
No, it kind of went up and down the chain of command, and thus the span of ages.
Ah, very interesting. I know that within Japan, there were kind of the really hardcore people. And then, I mean, I guess in the Japanese military at the time, you went from hardcore to, oh my gosh, so hardcore. There wasn't like a mamby-pamby side of it, but... So this was the real hardcore guys.
These were pretty hardcore guys, and the military in Japan had been staging coups. This was not an unusual, unprecedented thing. They had staged multiple coups since 1931, and so this was just par for the course.
All right. Well, now could you explain either of those theories of Kurt Gödel? I mean, actually,
sure.
Really, could you? Like,
of course. I wouldn't have put myself out there if I couldn't.
I guess that's a good point. So, okay, so he's a great mathematician, just of one of the world's masters of mathematics, far greater mathematician than a piker like Albert Einstein, for example, who was never...
Well, true, because Einstein wasn't really good at math.
No.
I mean, relatively speaking.
His own math teacher said he was lazy at math.
He was a real lazy bones, yeah.
Yeah. So, Gödel is, but he's also a logician, and so he does this very advanced logic, and he proves that God exists. Mm-hmm. Did he do that really?
Well, he made a version of the ontological argument that many people think is an improvement on the one that St. Anselm had done. To understand what Gödel did with the argument for God's existence, you kind of need to understand what he did for mathematics first, because what he did at the time in mathematics, this was in the early 20th century, there was a quest to show that mathematics was consistent and that you could prove any true mathematical statement from a certain set of starting assumptions, which are known as axioms. And what Gödel did was he found a way of taking any mathematical expression, any statement about mathematics, and then turn that into a number. And then there were rules about how you could prove that number based on your starting axioms, your starting assumptions. And what he then invited people to consider was the following statement about mathematics. This statement cannot be proved from the axioms. Now, if that statement is true, you can't prove it from the axioms. But if the statement is false, then you could prove it from the axioms. And so you would have this paradox. And in order to resolve the paradox, you have to conclude that the statement is true. You cannot prove it from the axioms. So that showed that mathematics was incomplete. That's why it's called Gödel's incompleteness theorem, because there are some truths that cannot be proved. Now, what you do in that case is you expand your set of axioms. So like you've got the statement that Gödel asked us to consider, which cannot be proved from the other axioms. So you add it as a new axiom. but then you can just do the same thing all over again, and you can keep indefinitely adding new unprovable truths as axioms.
Right.
Now, as that happens, we human beings are intelligently understanding all of this. So these statements have what he called, or what could be called, mathematical intelligibility. But what he's shown is that there is an infinite number of mathematically intelligible statements, and in order to, that cannot be proved, but that are already there somehow. I mean, we're realizing these things, but they're already there. And so from that, he reasons that there needs to be a greater consciousness than ours that embraces all of these mathematical truths, all possible mathematical truths, and that mind could only be described as the mind of God. And so that's his ontological proof for God's existence.
That's really something. I mean, even just the proof that mathematics itself is incomplete is really something, even before you do the God part, because it gives you a sense of that knowledge itself is those who would claim, say, that science could explain everything. Well, that can't be the case if science relies on mathematics, and mathematics itself can never be fully complete.
Well, and as scientists themselves would acknowledge, the truths of science, or the proposed truths of science, are always provisional. They're always subject to revision. So scientists don't even try to claim rigorous mathematical proofs for their ideas.
All right, you can ask Jimmy any question you want, but no more questions on Kurt Gödel. My brain is hurting. I got to go heal up, but your questions are welcome.
I thought I made that pretty painless.
Well, you did actually, probably for most people, yeah. 888, I don't even do arithmetic on the air. 888,
and we didn't have to do any today.
No, that's true. 888-318-7884, the number. It's an open forum. I'm going to go to a caller before we go to a break because we got time.
Yeah.
Giovanni in Rhode Island, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. It's free for all Friday. You can ask Jimmy anything you want. Go ahead, Giovanni.
Hello. So I was recently reading your book, The Fathers Know Best. I'm pretty early. I just started reading it yesterday. And early on, you say that the fathers can often disagree, like, for example, the Genesis. My question is, when does a view become schismatic or heretical? For example, let's say a father disagrees with the Eucharist being, the real presence of Christ.
Okay.
That would be my question, yeah.
Okay, so in looking at an individual and asking the question, was this person's view heretical, we have to ask it from the perspective of what had been determined at that time, because the Holy Spirit leads the church into greater understanding of the faith. It's a process called doctrinal development. It's not the same as what happened in the Bible, where you have more actual new revelation being given over the course of the Bible, but it's kind of like that. So, for example, we wouldn't expect a person in the Old Testament to be able to articulate the doctrine of the Trinity, because even though there were hints in the Old Testament that there was more than one person in the Godhead, it hadn't been clearly revealed the way it was with Jesus. So if you're talking about an Old Testament figure, you can hold him accountable for what had been revealed in his day, but not what would be revealed later. And in the same way, with the church father, you can hold the church father accountable for what had been determined in his day, but not for what would be determined later on. And so what you do in assessing was a church father a heretic or not is you look at his opinions and you say, were any of them contrary to what the church in his day had infallibly defined to be divinely revealed? And if the church in his day had infallibly defined something to be divinely revealed, and he rejected it, that would make his view heretical. In terms of schism, it's not an opinion that is schismatic. What schism is the refusal of submission to the Roman pontiff or refusal of communion with those who are in communion with the Roman pontiff. And so those are two very specific kind of actions, and he could have held any opinion he wanted, but if he refused communion or refused submission to the Roman pontiff or refused communion with those who are in communion with the Roman pontiff, that would make him schismatic.
Nope. All right, Giovanni, I guess that was satisfying to you. I was going to wait to see if you had a response for Jimmy, but we'll take a quick break because the lines are filling up, and we want to get right back and answer whatever questions folks have on this Free for All Friday with Jimmy Akin here on Catholic Answers Live.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
St. Augustine gives us tremendous insight as to why we should pray. He says this: why God should ask us to pray when He knows what we need even before we ask Him may perplex us if we do not realize that our Lord and God does not want to know what we want, for as God He cannot fail to already know it. But rather He wants us to exercise our desire through our prayers so that we may be able to receive what He is preparing to give us.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and you are welcome to call with your questions for Jimmy on any aspect of the faith or science or whatever you like to talk to Jimmy about. 888-318-7884, the number. Let's see who's next. We got Jason. Jason, are you there with us?
Yes.
Hi, Jason. How old are you?
10.
Well, it's great to get your call. Thank you for calling. What is your question for Mr. Akin?
I'm wondering why they, in Protestant churches, why they only take communion once a month, but in Catholic churches they take it like every day.
It really varies from one Protestant church to another. Some Protestant churches have communion every Sunday. Some of them may even have it every day. I believe that's the case in the Anglican Church, for example. I believe they have daily communion services. Others, it's more rare. Some even may only take it once a year. And some, like the Quakers, don't even really do it at all. And so there's a wide range of different practices. And one thing you may notice is like the Anglican Church, which has communion, I believe, every day in many places, they're pretty close to the Catholic Church. And the Lutherans, who unless I'm very much mistaken, they have it at least every Sunday. They're a little bit farther away, but still pretty close to Catholic. And what you see is a pattern of the closer you are to being Catholic, the more elements of the Catholic faith you retained, the more priority there is put on the Eucharist, the more important it is. And so the more often people receive it. And I think that that's the explanation for why some groups take it less often and other groups take it more often, because in the Catholic Church we recognize that the Eucharist is Jesus himself. That makes it very important and very sacred and something you would really want to do as much as you can. And so because we recognize that the Eucharist really is Jesus, that makes it something that we want to take a lot more frequently. We want to receive communion frequently. But for groups of Protestants that don't believe that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist, it's not as important to them, and so they don't do it as often.
What do you think of that, Jason?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for your call. I hope you'll call again sometime, okay?
Okay.
All right. Let us move on then to Rachel in Spring, Texas, listening to EWTN Channel 130 on Sirius XM satellite radio. Rachel, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hi, everybody. My question is that, so they've opened up our churches at a certain capacity here, and I want to go back, but my big fear is that I'll be carrying this virus, and I usually go very early when most of my elders would go. And it just scares me that I would make someone sick from this. And I want to go, but I'm at a point that I don't want it to hurt anyone. If I have something.
Yeah, let's let Jimmy address that.
Well, I think we have to be careful and realistic about what the dangers are, because life does involve risk, and if we try to avoid all risk, we're going to avoid all life, because life just involves some risk. What we want to do is manage the risk and be reasonable about it. Now, if you're a person who is older or has some risk factors that could make COVID much worse for you, then that could be additional reason to stay home. And in fact, I think every U.S. bishop, certainly everyone that I'm aware of, is currently dispensing his subjects from the requirement to go to Mass. So we're not required at the moment to go to Mass. But in terms of if we have the opportunity to go to Mass and we want to do that, we need to look realistically at the risks both for ourselves and for others. So if we personally would have a greater risk of COVID, then that would be a reason to stay home. On the other hand, if we have a greater risk of giving it to someone else, especially the older people you might encounter at Mass, then that would be a greater reason to stay home as well. So part of the equation, now it sounds like in your case, you're not worried for yourself here, but you're worried about giving it to others. So I would say do a realistic assessment of what are the odds you would have this and could give it to others. If you have symptoms of COVID or a similar disease, that could be a reason to stay home. If you've been recently exposed to someone who had COVID or had symptoms, that could be a reason to stay home until you know that you're in the clear and you don't have it, which takes typically a couple of weeks. If you work in a hospital and are exposed to lots of sick people, that could be a reason to stay home. But if none of those things apply, if, let's say you live on your own, so you don't have a family that's around you to, give you the infection, if you aren't out there, let's say you're working from home so you don't have to encounter other people, then the odds of you having this would be quite low. And I would say they could easily be low enough that you're not going to reasonably pose a significant danger to other people, and it would be legitimate to just go ahead and go and not worry about it, because you can't avoid all risk to yourself. You can't avoid all risk to others. It's a question of being prudent and managing the risk. And if you don't have particular factors that would lead you to think that you would pose a danger to others, then don't be paranoid about, I'm going to give it to someone even though I have no reason to think I've even got it.
Rachel, I appreciate the question. I realize you might want to meditate on this more, this answer that Jimmy gave. And so you can listen again as soon as the show's over. It posts again on YouTube, Facebook, and our own website, Catholic.com again. So if you want to work through the logical steps that Jimmy just took you through, it's available there for you to do that. Thank you very much for the call. Up next, Michael in North Carolina. Michael, your question for Jimmy Akin.
I hope I can actually formulate the question properly.
Well, we all do.
Something I've heard several times. Hello?
No, I was just saying we all hope you could formulate the question logically.
I'm sorry. No, my wife and I both are converts. So over the years, we had a lot of conversations with different people. Today I was leaving adoration. There's a man I knew from church who was coming in, and he was having, I guess, a crisis of faith. He's considering other denominations. His wife is not Catholic, but he was talking. He still finds adoration very important in the time of study. So he hasn't left the church. But one of the things he brought up that one of the ministers in his particular church, because they were saying that they actually do hold, and I don't know, it was a mainstream denomination, but I cannot recall which one it was. But long story short, he was saying that from a legitimacy of the church, the line of Peter, making the priest the only one who can consecrate, and so forth. He was quoting about Constantine, that at Constantine is basically where that line was severed in some ways, that he was actually more in control of the church, and they're kind of nullified that. And I'm not sure. I've heard this before. I don't exactly know what he was talking about.
Well, I can assure you, Michael, Jimmy has heard it before, and he can give you an explanation. But the basic objection is that the church might have had an unbroken line, an apostolic and priestly line, but that was somehow broken during the time of Constantine. Jimmy, go ahead.
So anytime you hear a claim like this, you want to ask for proof. I mean, you don't believe something just because someone tells it to you. And especially if you're not an expert on Constantine and the church in his day, and someone just makes some claim about something that happened hundreds of years ago and you're not read up on it, do not base decisions about your faith life on things like that. Check it out. And if people make claims like this, if they want you to believe something, the obligation is on them to prove it. Whoever wants you to change your mind, they need to show you evidence, so they have the burden of proof. So I would counsel this young man, having encountered this claim, to challenge the people who told him and say, give me the proof. Who says this? Show me a reputable historian who says this, not someone writing a book by a fundamentalist publishing house that is not a historian, not just something that gets said in a Jack Chick tract. Let's really run this down, because if this was true, it would be in the historical records. And we have records of Constantine's reign. We have records written by Christians during Constantine's reign. For example, the father of church history, a man known as Eusebius of Caesarea, wrote a very famous book called Church History. He also wrote a book called The Life of Constantine. He knew Constantine. He was actually a big fan of Constantine, because what Constantine did was announce freedom of religion for Christians. Previously, they'd been a persecuted sect, but he announced freedom of religion and toleration for Christians, and so he was popular. And he was the emperor, and he was an influential guy, but he didn't take control of the church. An example of that: there was a controversy in the church at the time about was Jesus really God or not. It was known as the Arian controversy, and Constantine decided, it would be good to get a bunch of bishops together to thrash this out. So he summoned a council. It's known as the Council of Nicaea, or the First Council of Nicaea, happened in the year 325. And he let the bishops thrash it out. And the bishops, not Constantine, were the ones who decided the issue. So Constantine may have been an influential guy and a protector of Christians, but he was not running the church. In fact, until the very end of his life, he wasn't even baptized. So he wasn't even a member of the church until the very end of his life. He was friendly to Christians and protected Christians, but he wasn't even a Christian. So he was not running the church, and this wouldn't interfere with the line of apostolic succession anyway, since he was never ordained. Apostolic succession passes through the bishops when they consecrate other bishops, and they continue to do that. Constantine was never consecrated a bishop. The lines of apostolic succession all continued. Nobody at the time said, there's been a sudden interruption, then we couldn't ordain people, and so there are no new bishops because Constantine took everything over. That never happened. It's just like in the Soviet Union or in communist China, where when the government really was hostile to Christians and would try to interfere with Christian affairs, people would pass down the lines in secret if they had to. And so there were clandestinely consecrated Chinese bishops for a long time. And that's what happens when the church has to deal with political authorities that are hostile to it. It works around the situation. It doesn't allow the church to get severed or anything like that. It just does what it can in times of persecution, just like the times that preceded Constantine. If the church had survived all that time when it was being persecuted before Constantine announced religious freedom, if it could pass the lines of apostolic succession down before Constantine when it was being persecuted, then it certainly can pass them down when it's got a friendly guy for once. And so basically, whether the government is friendly or unfriendly, the church passes down its lines of authority, its lines of apostolic succession, and there's simply no historical basis to what your friend was told. And I would invite you to, get him a link to this, maybe on YouTube. You could send him the link to this video and let him watch this segment, and I hope it's of help.
Thanks, Michael. I hope it's of help too. There's when you go to our website, Catholic.com, for the video, there's timestamps on these things. So you can just click on the timestamp and it'll take you directly to this part of the video, and you can even send that timestamp to your friend. Very grateful for the question. There's lots of folks on the line, so we're going to get to you all as quick as we can when we come back. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's a special open forum on this Friday afternoon. You're welcome to call with any question you've got. 888-318-7884.
Catholic Answers Live.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. It's free, and you'll have instant access to our daily broadcast, the schedule of upcoming shows, and you'll even be able to search the archive and listen to thousands of past shows. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
2 wonderful episodes of Catholic Answers Focus this week. Get them wherever you get your podcasts, or listen at CatholicAnswersFocus.com. On Monday's episode, Father Sebastian Walsh, the author of Secrets from Heaven, joins us to consider today's struggles in the light of the gospel stories of Jesus asleep in the storm. There's more to that story than you might think. And then on Wednesday, we asked Trent Horn to tackle a very difficult question, the question of nothing. Is there really such a thing as nothing? Did God really make the universe out of nothing? Prepare to let your mind bend. Catholic Answers Focus is free and brand new twice a week, and now also available on YouTube. Visit us at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or subscribe to Focus on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Does the church have too many rules? Join me, Dr. David Anders, as we answer your questions right here on Called to Communion, Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Our guest is real Jimmy Akin, and I distinguish real Jimmy Akin from Amigurumi Jimmy Akin, who we met earlier in the week. An amazing... Is it doll? Would doll be the right way to say it? Amazing.
Well, I mean, I'm a guy, so to me it's an action figure.
Oh, yeah, amazing action figure made by someone who listens on to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. One of the huge number of people who listen to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. I'm not saying that like I'm jealous. I'm just saying it as a fact. But Amigurumi Jimmy now among, something, since you've redone your atmosphere there, a lot of people have commented on the stuffed animals. And now Amigurumi Jimmy's down among the stuffed animals.
Right. So I have a bookcase for people who aren't watching online. I have some bookcases in my home office, and on the lower shelves of one of them, I have a whole bunch of stuffed animals that belong to my wife, Renee. And I've kept, she passed on 28 years ago now. Wow. And I've kept all the animals since then. I know their names and personalities that she gave them. And I thought when I got Amigurumi Jimmy, which is made out of yarn, I would give him a home with them. So he's there now. Also, if you look up, if you are watching online and you look up on that same bookshelf, we have a picture of my wife in her wedding dress as well.
How wonderful. So that's your kind of your acknowledgement to your wife there, that whole shelf there. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And now Amigurumi Jimmy, who is freakishly similar to actual real Jimmy, is there among them.
Yeah.
All right. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and in Carlton, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. You are up next, Ann. Your question for Jimmy.
Thank you. Hi, Jimmy. I have a question
Howdy.
on Daniel. Chapter 10, verse 13. I'm not clear about that. And it seems like we were talking about the prince of the kingdom of the Persians. And that prince, I'm assuming, is a demonic figure. And that the Michael is the archangel Michael. Can you explain to me about this? As I've always wondered about this.
Sure. And so I'll give you a brief explanation now, but what you actually want to do is go and I hate to toot my own horn on this, but it is relevant. Go listen to last Friday's episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. It's called God and the Gods. So just look up Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Last Friday's episode on God and the Gods goes into this exact question. And I talk about this passage and other related passages. Basically, in the Old Testament, God has a heavenly court because he's pictured as a king. And so just like an earthly king with his court, with various court officials, God has one too. Now, in any court, whether it's of an earthly king or God is the heavenly king, there are people of different ranks. And some of these are very high. The word in Hebrew that gets used here in the book of Daniel and in other places is the word sar. And it gets translated more than one way. Prince is an acceptable English translation, but it can also mean just things like commander. When we think of a prince, we often think of the biological son of a king. And that's not what's going on here. Angels are sometimes described, high-ranking angels are sometimes described as the sons of God, but since they're created beings, they're not God's biological sons. They're adopted sons, just like we Christians are. So some of these angelic sons of God are high-ranking enough that they get put in charge of things. They're the commanders or the princes of those things. And one of the things we learn in the Old Testament is that it was the view of the Old Testament authors that each nation of people had an angelic prince that was in charge of it. And so what's happened in Daniel chapter 10 is Daniel has been praying to God, and 21 days go by before he gets an answer. And Gabriel then shows up and says, I would have been here sooner, but the prince of Persia, meaning the angelic being in charge of Persia, resisted me for 21 days. And the only person who came and helped me was Michael, who is, he says, one of the chief princes or chief commanders, and is the one that has command of your people, meaning Israel. So we've got the angelic prince of Persia trying to stop Gabriel from answering Daniel's prayer. Meanwhile, Michael comes and kind of has the angelic prince of Persia in a holding action. I mean, maybe it's a headlock, I don't know, but he's doing some kind of military holding action to keep back the prince of Persia so that Gabriel can break through the lines and deliver his message to Daniel. And then he says, now I'm going to go back, and together Michael and I are going to join forces, and we're going to defeat the prince of Persia. And after we've gotten him out of the way, it's going to make room for the prince of Greece to come in and stir up trouble. And so you have this military situation with different angelic princes in charge of nations doing battle in the spiritual world behind the scenes that has then effects on the destinies of those same nations here on earth. And so that's what's going on here. The Prince of Persia is an angelic prince, but since he's trying to thwart God's will by stopping the answer from being sent to David, we know he's a bad guy. And so what we see with these angelic princes is they are not all on the same side. Even though they may have all started as so-called or adopted sons of God in the heavenly hierarchy, some of them went bad and are now resisting God's will. And so from a modern perspective, we would describe them as demonic.
What do you make of it, Ann?
What do you think about that? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. So you're asking Jimmy,
Hello?
what does he think about that?
Yeah, is this because it's an Old Testament and their understanding? Do you think that really is something that happens today?
I would say that, this is the inspired Word of God, and so it is conveying truth. Now, we always have to be careful about how truth gets expressed. We don't necessarily, sometimes people use symbolism and literary figures of speech, and we have to be especially careful of this when we're talking about things happening in the invisible spiritual world, which goes beyond our ability to comprehend it. However, since we know that there were angelic spirits that were sort of the guardian angels of ancient nations at that time, and since we know that God even gives guardian angels to us as individuals to guide and protect us, I would assume that nations have guardian angels, guardian angelic spirits of one kind or another, probably of both good and bad. I mean, I'm sure, let's say communist China is up to no good. We could attribute that to the influence of bad spirits who have no doubt a leader, but God also cares for the Chinese people, and there are many good people in China, and so they're going to have correspondingly guardian angels protecting them, and they probably have a leader too. That's just conjecture on my part, but I would say the same principles that applied in the Old Testament would still apply today, but they were probably being simplified so that Daniel could understand them. I would suggest that there's probably a richer, more complex picture of what's going on with both good and bad spirits influencing each nation.
Ann, thank you. Thank you for that. That was a fascinating question, and it elicited a lot of fascinating stuff. That was really exciting. Thank you very much for the question. I'm going to move now, however, because we have so many people on the line, to Neil in Olympia, Washington, watching on YouTube. Neil in Olympia, Washington, your question for Jimmy Akin, please.
Yeah. Hey, Jimmy. So I got a question on the Olivet Discourse as well as Revelation. I guess those are the ones kind of like prophetic passages in the Bible. Does that make it seem? Does it make Jesus look like he had failed prophecies on those verses? Like, for example, when he always says, "I'm coming quickly," yet 2,000 years later, it's not here yet. And also, one specific verse, Matthew 16:27-28, it says, "Some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom."
Okay. So we've got about at least three different things, and Sai, I hope you'll help me keep track of them. We have to take each verse, each passage on its own. So you mentioned the one from Revelation about, "Behold, I am coming quickly." Jesus comes in more than one way. Jesus came at his so-called first coming when he was born in human form. He's going to return in human form at the end of time. But he also comes in other ways. For example, if you look in the book of Joshua, at one point just before the Battle of Jericho, the commander of the Lord's army appears to Joshua. And it's the same word, Sar, in Hebrew. So this is the Sar or prince who's in charge of the Lord's army, just like the angelic princes we were talking about. And some of the church fathers looked at that and said, that's the pre-incarnate Christ. That's Christ coming in another way, appearing to Joshua. And we also read about God in the Old Testament coming in judgment. And so there are different, and that happens on many occasions when God visits a people, sometimes for blessing, sometimes for punishment, but God comes in many different ways. And so Christian theology has acknowledged that that's also true of Jesus, that he's got his first and second comings, which are ones where he appears in human form, but he appears in other ways too. Sometimes he appears to people in a vision. Sometimes he appears in other ways, like for blessing or for punishment. And these are sometimes called his middle comings because they occur between his first and second comings. Now, I think, and this is just my opinion, but based on my study of the evidence, I think that the book of Revelation is mostly about events occurring either in the first century or in the first few centuries. And I think Jesus did come spiritually to defeat the forces that were against the church, and he also executed judgment on apostate Jerusalem. So I think he came in more than one way in the early centuries. And I think that one or both of those, either defeating the forces against Christianity that went on through the era of the persecutions, or the judgment on Jerusalem that happened in AD 70, I think both of those are one or both of those is what Jesus is talking about in Revelation when he says, "Behold, I come quickly." That's what he's talking about. When we mention the Olivet Discourse, which is his major prophetic discourse in the Gospels, it's all about the temple. It's really not about the second coming. And when he says that this generation will not pass before they see these things happen, that was absolutely true. He was saying that in AD 33. By AD 70, his prophecies had been fulfilled. He had come in judgment on Jerusalem, and all of that happened within a 40-year generation. So that was absolutely true. When in Matthew 16, he says that some are standing here who will not taste death before they see, and then the phrase will vary a little bit in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but in essence, before they see the kingdom of God coming with power, I think we are done a disservice by the chapter breaks there. If you ignore the chapter break and keep reading, what's the next event that happens? It's the transfiguration. And in each case, the evangelist says, like, and just a few days later, the transfiguration happened. And so that's what he's talking about in that case. There were some standing there, namely Peter, James, and John, who did not taste death before they saw the kingdom come with power in the moment of the transfiguration. And all three of the synoptic gospels make the connection by saying, and it was just a few days later that this happened.
I think you got them all. Neil, did that address all the questions you had for Jimmy?
Yeah. I
right.
appreciate that.
Very good. We got to take a quick break, Neil, so I will leave it there. I'm glad we were able to address your questions. By we, me, and Jimmy. You noticed the distribution of the workload there. Jimmy did most of the work, but
you're using the associative we, just like let us make men in our image.
Exactly.
God does all the work, but he's associating other people with the action.
Right. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin.
Hi, this is Trevor Williams from the Pittsburgh Pirates, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Have you ever been so grief-stricken and so heart-sick that you can't see God? You can't see God in the tragedy. You can't see God in that cross. You can't see God in that sick. Why? You're enveloped in that grief. You're enveloped in fear. And God is out the window. You don't see him standing right next to you.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and that means the lines are full. That generally happens when Jimmy's here, but we'll keep working and try to get to as many as we can. Ross in Frankfort, Kentucky, listening on the Catholic Answers Live is next. Ross, thank you for downloading the Catholic Answers Live app onto your phone. Your question for Jimmy, please.
Yes, I'm a Baptist, so I'm trying to understand more aspects of the Catholic faith a little bit better. I did have a question about the difference between, I guess, the eternal state of someone who's been considered blessed and someone who's considered saint. I know that a saint is considered to be in heaven. I didn't know if blessed was as well, if they're in different parts of heaven or they're closer to God, or if they are both in heaven, like why make the distinction in the first place? So
okay. Yeah, so really what these terms are, at least in this usage, now there are other ways that these terms get used. I mean, saint it just means holy one. And so anybody who is holy or special in any sense can have that word applied to them, whether it's in Greek or Latin or English. So like in St. Paul's writings, we often read about saints here on earth, meaning Christians, because Christians are holy to God. They're God's holy people. So all Christians are saints from that perspective. But over the course of time, the term saint came to be used, just the way English grew up, for one of its uses is for people who are in heaven. And so in this context, when we're talking about saints versus blesseds, saint just means someone who is in heaven. And it doesn't mean anything in particular about how high up they are in heaven, how much glory they're experiencing. That's something we leave to God. We really don't know that. But the church has a process that it uses to investigate, well, what evidence do we have that someone is in heaven? And this process is sometimes called their cause for canonization. And it goes through different stages. It starts with the local diocese of wherever they died. And if the person had a reputation for holiness, and if people were really impressed by that and they want to investigate, well, might this person be a saint, the local bishop will open their cause for canonization, which means he's opening a process of investigation to determine ultimately, do we have evidence that this person is in heaven? And when he opens that process, the person will be given the title servant of God. And that means that, well, they served God in this life, and we're checking out whether or not they might be in heaven. Then the process continues, and they investigate, did this person really live a life of holiness in this life? Did they display heroic virtue that went beyond just what everybody does? And if they displayed heroic virtue, then we get to a new stage, and they get a new title, which is venerable. And because they deserve some veneration. They deserve getting their props for having cooperated with God's grace and lived out a life of real Christian virtue. Then we look for, well, we need to know more than just what did they do in this life to know if they're in heaven, because we don't have access to the secrets of people's hearts. We don't know what was happening in their hearts in their dying moments. So we need something more, something from after the time of their death to give us evidence that they're actually in heaven. And what the church takes as that evidence is answered prayer. So if people are praying for a miracle in the name of this saint, like, saint, or, it wouldn't be saint at this point, but venerable so-and-so, please ask God to grant me this miracle. Let's say, heal my daughter of cancer or something. And then if that happens, if someone is miraculously healed of a disease in connection with prayer requests being sent to God through that person, that's evidence that God's listening to that person's prayer requests, and thus that person is on the side of the angels and is in heaven. And so after the church gets a miraculous, and they really check this out rigorously. In fact, they even will use doctors who are atheists to examine these miracle cases and say, is this medically explainable or not? But if they get a apparent miracle in connection with asking for a person's intercession in heaven, they say, okay, that's evidence that the person is in heaven. We're going to move them up to the next stage of canonization, and we give them a new title. We call them a blessed. Blessed originally just meant happy, but in this context, it means a person that we have pretty good evidence they're in heaven, but it's not conclusive evidence yet because we only had the one miracle. Maybe that was a fluke, but if it happens again, probably not a fluke. And so they keep looking for additional evidence, another second miracle. And if a second miracle happens, then the church, at the discretion of the Pope, this is all under his judgment, may say, okay, we have enough evidence. We have multiple miracles in connection with this person praying for people that suggests they really are in heaven. At that point, the Pope may choose to go ahead and canonize them as a saint, at which point they get the name saint. So really, it doesn't deal with where they are in heaven or how much glory they have. It deals with our confidence level. That's what all of these titles do. The lowest, servant of God, means we have enough confidence we want to look into this person. Venerable means we've checked it out a little bit. We have confidence they really did live a life of Christian virtue. Blessed, or beatus to use the Latin term, that means, hey, we've got some actual evidence there in heaven because of this miracle. And saint means, okay, we've got enough evidence, we don't need to look any further. We really are confident this person is in heaven. So what all these different titles reflect is not the state of the person per se, it's our state of confidence about the evidence we have that they are in heaven.
Okay, Ross?
Yes, that's very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your interest, and I hope we'll hear from you again. You're always welcome to call here. I'm going to go real quick now to David in San Francisco, California, however, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. David, can you ask your question quickly to give Jimmy a chance to answer?
Yeah, sure. So Bart Ehrman, I know you guys are aware of him. He recently released a book called Heaven and Hell, Theology of the Afterlife, and his basic claim is that because Jesus was a Jew, he didn't believe in heaven and hell per se. He believed in the kingdom of God kind of coming down and there being a bodily resurrection. And that when the apostles evangelized the Greeks, they already believed in a soul. And so it kind of got mixed. And so he thinks eternal torment or whatever wasn't really a state of being in hell. He just believes that people would, he claims that Jesus believed in like kind of a disintegration and people would cease to exist.
Okay,
like
let's let Jimmy answer that because we're really close to the...
Yeah, so I probably won't be able to get to every point that was mentioned there. It's true that Jesus did not believe in the picture of heaven and hell that we have today, where somebody dies and their spirit goes off to forever stay in heaven or forever stay in hell, away from the earth with no body. You might call that the ghost version of heaven and hell. That is not a Jewish idea, and that is not Jesus's idea, and that is not the Christian church's idea. Whereas souls will go to heaven or hell for a time. They're not going to be forever separated from earth with no body. There will come a point where they will be reunited with their body and they'll be resurrected. And at least for the blessed, for the saved, for the saints, they will be on the new earth. God's going to renovate the heavens and the earth. They're going to be united together. Revelation depicts that as God's dwelling being with men. So we're in a state of full spiritual union with God, even though we're in our bodies here on the earth. That was Jesus's view, and that's the view of the Catholic Church. In some of these other things, like if the implication, I haven't yet gotten all the way through Bart's book on this, but if he's trying to imply that Jewish people didn't believe in a soul, that's nuts. They clearly did. In fact, the Old Testament has to repeatedly warn them not to call up the dead and try to talk to them because that implies a soul. And so they clearly believed in souls. In terms of the annihilationist view, that is contradicted by other passages, but I can hear the music, so we'll have to discuss that another time.
I'm so sorry. We had such a meaty question there at the end, but we did the best we could, and thank you, David. Maybe call another time when Jimmy is on. Jimmy Akin, thank you very much. Always appreciate it.
My pleasure, Cy Kellett.
Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World has a brand new episode today and each Friday. Check it out at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, available on the internets. Thank you so much. That was a fun week, everybody here. Good job, Nick. Good job, Darren. Okay, Zach, you did a good job as well. Jesus Christ is the light of the nations. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.